Wedding Bells Ahead by Arleta Richardson. Chapter 1. Ma Has a Surprise.
"I've never known it to rain on my birthday,"
I said, leaning back against the big tree at the corner of the lane and gazing up at the canopy of leaves over our heads.
"This won't last long, Mabel," Sarah Jane assured me. "When the drops are this big, there are never many of them."
"Do you suppose this is an indication of things to come?"
"By all means. You've never been 19 years old before. The possibilities for disaster are unlimited."
"Sarah Jane, be serious. I don't mean that I think everything will go wrong, but you'll have to admit that it'll be a different year than we've ever had before."
Sarah Jane nodded. Apparently she decided not to tease me into a different frame of mind, for she leapt into silence. She had been a part of my life longer than any other person outside my family, and her boast that she knew me better than I knew myself was not an idle one. I could recall many times when my world might have collapsed had Sarah Jane Clark not been there to support it.
"Are you still trying to decide what you should do about next year?"
she said finally.
"I was waiting for you to make that decision,"
I grinned.
"You've never failed me yet."
"I could come up with something slightly less ridiculous than I've heard you suggest so far."
"I'm not being ridiculous,"
I protested.
"You know I can't live with the Williams' family now that Len and I are engaged. The only practical thing to do is to find a position in another district."
"You sound as though North Branch had only one house in it,"
Sarah Jane snorted.
"There has to be a better solution than leaving town. I'd set up a cot in the back of this schoolroom before I'd give up a place I loved."
I had to laugh at the thought, though the situation seemed serious to me. My first year of teaching in the little country school had been a success, in spite of several near disasters and one very hostile parent. I felt good about the way the children had learned and the wonderful friends I had made. And best of all, of course, was the fact that Leonard Williams had asked me to marry him.
"You're lucky that Len's father is the board president,"
Sarah Jane was saying.
"If it had been anyone else, you might not have been offered the school again. After all, you did break your contract by falling in love."
"That's true,"
I nodded.
"but I still can't go back there to live. Len said he would get a room in town, but I couldn't let him do that."
"It certainly is tiresome not being able to do what is most convenient because people's tongues will wag."
"Especially when I know that they're going to wag anyway. I can just hear Augusta Harris if I stayed in the same house with Len, even though his folks were there."
Sarah Jane's eyes lit up.
"That's it! Augusta!"
"Don't even suggest it,"
I said hastily.
"You know I couldn't live with Augusta for a whole year."
"Be reasonable, Mabel. She's all alone. She has room
And she bites,"
I finished.
"I'm on the receiving end of her caustic remarks often enough without setting up housekeeping with her."
"It was only a thought,"
Sarah Jane said with a shrug.
"I just can't see you having to leave North Branch because of a place to live. Staying with Augusta seems like a practical solution."
"Thanks, Sarah Jane. Even the cot in the back of the schoolroom sounds appealing by contrast."
The rain had stopped. As we ambled back toward the house, I thought fondly of my first year of teaching at the little school in North Branch. As far as I had heard, there were no new children in the community. With the exception of Abe Lawton, who had left before school ended this year, my class would be the same if I returned.
"Len says I don't have to be afraid of Cy Lawton this year anyway,"
I told Sarah Jane.
"He knows better than to call attention to himself in that county since his wife reported him for beating Abe."
"That's one point in your favor,"
Sarah Jane replied.
"But I'm not so sure about his daughter Elizabeth,"
I confided.
"I don't think she'll hover in the background just because Len asked me to marry him. She's a determined individual."
"So are you, Mabel, and Len chose you, not Elizabeth."
"I'll be surprised if she considers that the final word. She'll think of some way to complicate my life."
Sarah Jane laughed.
"I'm glad to hear you making plans to go back, even though you're convinced that nothing but trial and tribulation await you."
"Not really," I replied. "There are a lot of happy things about that little school." I love the children and I love teaching. Unfortunately, I'm also fond of a comfortable place to live.
It'll work out,
Sarah Jane promised.
There's a place in North Branch with your name on it.
I eyed her suspiciously.
Why aren't you campaigning harder for Augusta Harris?
I demanded.
I know you think that's where I should go.
It's your birthday. I'm being good to you.
She changed the subject.
It was sure nice to see our old friends from high school today, wasn't it?
Yes,
I agreed.
It's a shame they all had to hurry back, and I'll admit I was a little sorry not to have Russ Bradley here. The 6 of us had good times in school, didn't we?
The best, but that chapter is closed.
I nodded.
I made the right choice. I'm not regretting it.
The rain started again, and we ran the last few steps to the porch. I opened the screen door just in time to see Ma totter from the stove to the table and sit down heavily.
Ma,
I exclaimed.
What's the matter?
Her face was pale, but she smiled.
I just felt a little dizzy, that's all. I'm fine.
I was alarmed. Ma had never been sick except for one bout with pneumonia when I was little.
Don't you think you'd better lie down? Shall I send Pa for the doctor?
Certainly not, Mabel, Ma said briskly.
I'm perfectly all right. I felt this way before you were born.
I looked at her blankly.
That was 19 years ago, Ma.
Sarah Jane laughed.
I think your ma is trying to tell you you're going to have a new brother or sister.
It was my turn to drop into a chair, gazing at Ma in bewilderment.
You're having a baby?
She nodded happily.
We're so pleased. The house has been too quiet the last year. But, Ma, you're already a grandmother. Aren't you a little old?
She prompted.
Of course not. I was only 21 when you were born, and I didn't have this convenient home to live in.
She looked around her kitchen fondly.
The wind and snow sifted into that little log cabin all winter. Reuben and Roy were only 4 and 2, and I had my hands full. I can tell you, this baby will be a joy to care for.
When will it be, Mrs. O'Dell?
Sarah Jane asked.
Does Ma know about it?
Oh, yes, your mother knows.
Ma laughed.
It will be at the end of November or the beginning of December. But I haven't time to sit here doing nothing. I've got to get this kitchen cleaned up.
I jumped up.
Oh, no, Ma. I'll clean the kitchen. You sit still. Better yet, go and lie down.
Whatever for?
Ma sputtered.
I'm not sick. You two run along and do whatever you were going to do. This is your birthday, and I want you to have a nice one.
I have had, Ma. The dinner with all our friends was wonderful.
I wouldn't have let you work that hard if I'd known,
I added reproachfully.
That's precisely why you didn't know,
Ma replied.
I didn't want you fussing over me all day.
Pa came into the kitchen and hung up his hat.
I see the news is out,
he remarked.
What do you think of our second family?
I haven't really taken it in yet, Pa,
I answered.
But if you and Ma are happy about it, then I will be. I won't be home to enjoy a new baby, though. Why didn't you do this 10 years ago? That's when I wanted a sister. And have you and Sarah Jane wear the poor thing out before its first birthday?
Ma said.
No. I think the Lord directed this correctly.
What makes you think you're getting a sister?
Pa asked.
I could use a boy to help around the place.
It's a girl, Pa, with violet-colored eyes and brown curls.
Your folks might be able to face another daughter now that you've grown up to be a fairly sensible young woman, Sarah Jane commented. Of course, she might not have someone like me to keep her on the straight and narrow.
That will definitely put her in the disadvantaged class,
I said.
But maybe Ma and Pa will have an easier time of it.
It was hard for me to imagine a new baby in my home. I wasn't even sure that I liked the idea. But as the summer went on, my feelings changed.
I can hardly wait until we have a little one in the house again,
Ma said.
It makes me feel about 10 years younger.
As I sewed for the coming school year, Ma worked on little garments. It was impossible not to be touched by her enthusiasm.
I don't think I've ever seen Ma look happier,
I told Sarah Jane.
It's like a whole new life beginning for her.
I'm sure it will be. And isn't she fortunate to have gotten you out of the way before she started it?
When I failed to react, Sarah Jane shook my arm.
Mabel, are you there? What's the matter with you anyway?
I don't know,
I sighed.
I guess there are too many things to think about right now. What if Ma is too old to have this baby? And what if I don't have a new school or a place to live?
Has the Lord ever failed to take care of you in the past?
Sarah Jane demanded.
Why should you doubt him now?
Then her voice softened.
You have had a lot of new situations to face in the last few months. Come on, you need a change of scenery. Let's go to town and look around, and maybe even splurge on some ice cream.
You're right,
I agreed.
I'm turning into a real gloom peddler. An afternoon in town will make a new person of me.
We picked up the mail on the way to the ice cream parlor, and Sarah Jane spotted the letter from Len before I did.
Open it, Mabel. You haven't seen him since Sunday.
She waited expectantly.
Don't you have any mail of your own to read?
I inquired.
Nothing that can't wait. What does he say?
Sarah Jane, do you intend to move in with us when we get married?
Of course not,
she replied indignantly.
Why would you ask a thing like that?
I just wondered, I replied. You are waiting for me to read this letter to you, aren't you?
Certainly.
She complacently spooned ice cream into her mouth as I tore open the envelope. Dear Mabel, I read aloud. It seems like 3 weeks instead of just 3 days since I've seen you. I'm glad there's only a month until school starts again. I have some good news for you. Augusta Harris has offered to let you stay with her this year. I think that's an excellent solution to our problem. You'll be near school and she'll take good care of you. I dropped the letter on the table and gave a deep groan.
Oh, a most intelligent young man,
Sarah Jane said.
If you recall, I said exactly the same thing.
And if you recall, I said I was not going to spend a year with Augusta,
I retorted.
You and Leonard can both forget it. It's not even a remote possibility.
End of chapter 1.